Assalamu alaikum student, welcome to this course teaching of English as a foreign language. Well students, we are in this fourth semester as you know, alright, and we are talking more of the micro level teaching in this semester. I know that I'm sure you know the difference between micro teaching and macro teaching. Yes, the micro teaching is when we teach in a particular class. So at micro level, when you teach a lesson to your students, so what do we call it? We call it micro teaching, and where we keep in mind the micro details, right? Once we will talk about micro teaching in the coming lectures, you will come to know that which details we'll be talking about in micro teaching. So the macro teaching is when we talk of this teaching at the macro level. We try to see the whole curricula that we will be teaching in that course. So come back to our session. Last week we talked about which stage? Production stage. And do you know which lecture is this? Yeah, today we are going to have 6th lecture on this, TOEFL 2, right? Alright, so students, last week we talked about production stage, and this lecture would be on, yes, you can see on the screen, this lecture we will be talking about all the 3 stages. So in other words, it's a glance. In fact, we will be having a bird eye view of all these stages again, right? And we'll keep in mind some important points to see in all these stages of an oral lesson that we talked about so far. So as usual, first of all, we have to review the previous lecture. So in the last lecture we talked about which stage? Production stage. So it's a 3rd stage, right? Before that we discussed presentation stage, where you present, and then you have a practice stage where you practice. Of course, there is a teacher. And in a controlled environment, my dear students, we practice the language exponent, we practice the lesson, we practice that, of course, the vocabulary items or the structures that the teacher has presented. So once you practice, then there is a time for production. So in the last lecture, we saw that it is a stage where, we let the learner work independently. Like we talk about a learner-driver analogy, right? So it's a time for that learner-driver to drive independently, right? And the practice stage, of course, we saw that there is a learner-driver, and of course instructor sits beside him. So in that way, what we do, that whenever that learner-driver makes a mistake, or right, he does something wrong, so immediately that instructor guides him, and that instructor helps him out. But in this case now, in the production stage, what we do that, yes, there is independent learning is there. So where the learner driver tries to drive on his own, and once he drives on his own, when he drives independently, what happens? Yes, so he learns so many things, right? He learns how to fix wing mirrors, he learns how to fix the back mirror, and he learns how to drive on his own lane. So lots of things he learns. And also a learner driver learns how to maintain a balance between accelerator and a clutch, right? And when to press the brakes. This is what when you learn driving. So when you practice, when you learn independently, slowly and gradually, you keep in mind the instructions which were given by your instructor. But you see, once you learn, you so many things you learn, and this we also call it what? Tacit knowledge. We call it TACIT. A tacit knowledge is the one that is learned, of course, by doing something, and sometimes it is not easy to transfer this knowledge. So this is what we saw, that of course the aim of the production stage is to give learners an opportunity, to experiment on his own, right? So once he experiments, yes, of course, in this stage he comes across many problems. And then of course, I mean, he recalls the instruction that he had in the practice stage or in the presentation stage. So then he tries to addresses the different problem that he faces. And of course, this is the real learning. That when he performs experiments, then he experiments, so of course he faces some problems and he tries to find solution to those problems. So this is one of the aims of production stage. And of course mistakes are there. It's natural that I mean a learner makes mistakes, and of course, I mean, if he makes mistakes, it means that he is learning. If you feel that a learner, of course, he says that he is not making mistakes or he does not make mistakes, which maybe we can say that maybe his learning is slow or he's not learning that much, right? So therefore, in the production stage, chances are there that the learner would make mistakes, like the learner driver. In fact, of course, I mean, does. So this is what we see in this stage. Mistakes are quite common, right? And of course, student, I mean, when they learn the language item, that conditional sentence, or that's sentence of past tense, or he learns how to analyze a discourse if you are teaching at higher level. Well, so what we do, of course, we let the learner experiment. And for this, my dear students, in this stage, what we do, we create the right conditions. Fine? Because if you create good conditions for the learner, so of course the learning would be better, the learning would be definitely faster, right? So what are the right conditions? Yes, particular, in fact, participation patterns, for example, can be pair work, group work, and of course intermingling of the students, right? So this is what we see, that we have to create, being teachers of the language. What we do, we create that particular participation patterns, and the use of language can come about. And for this, the most suitable, in fact, participation pattern for the production stage are what? The pair work. What happens in pair work? Yes, the word shows a pair, maybe two students, in fact. They, in fact, perform activity, of course, or it can be in a group work, right? More than two students, they work on a given project. And which kind of activities are there? Yes, they can be role plays, very important, right? When students perform role plays, of course, they act, right, as an actor. They are given different roles, right? So when a student acts as a chef, when a student acts as a travel agent, or when a student acts as a hotel manager, or he acts as a restaurant manager, so what happens? You see, in this way, of course, in different roles, the student behave in different roles, they act in different roles, and above all, they use language as per the situation. And of course, in the practice stage, students are provided with those situations, that this can be a situation and you are practicing. And maybe in the practice stage, what happens, students? Yeah, there is a practice, of course, and there is a teacher. But in the production stage, yes, the students practice independently, and there could be discourse chains, right? You ask for anything and there is a reply. You ask for information, maybe you are on a way where you forgot the way, or you don't know, you are in a new place, right? And you want to ask somebody for address, right? So how you ask, right? You, of course, in this way, so you ask and there is a reply as well, right? So there could be discourse chains in the class. Maybe you pass on the information. Could you tell me the address? Fine, I ask you, I ask one of the students, and then what happens? You ask Ali, Ali asks Zia, and Zia asks Mustafa, right? Like you see, if I ask you, fine, I mean, can I know your name, right? Do you have a ballpoint? I pass it on. Now the Zia asks, Zia, you ask him? Good. Yes, Zia, you ask Mustafa? Fine. Mustafa, you ask Ali? Ali, you ask Usman? Usman, you ask me? Yeah, okay, fine. I have a ballpoint with me, right? Which ballpoint you want? Right? You want piano ballpoint or the other ballpoint? So what is it? A discourse chain, right? There is a chain, of course. So this is what you might have talked about, chain and choice. Yes, what is change bache? Order. Why? The linear order, of course. And then choice means you change. If it's I work, all right. If I replace I with Ali, Ali works. So there is a choice mean the subject has been replaced. So then there can be discussions. All right, of course, that can be in the class. What can we do? Yes, example, food prices. You can discuss on food prices in Pakistan, food prices in Hyderabad, food prices in Karachi, food prices in Peshawar, food prices in Multan, food prices in Islamabad. You can have discussions. And in that discussion, you can say why prices of food go up, why there is inflation, right? What are the factors that cause inflation? So you can talk of that, right? Then you have communication gap activities, of course. I mean, one student knows and the other needs to know. So one has information, another needs information. So there can be communication gap activities, or there can be different games could be there, right? So these are some of the activities that we can use, or many more activities. If you can think of, you can design as many activities as you can. So dear students, these are what we talked about in the last stage, that is production stage, and very important stage. Why? Because this is a time that the learner practices. Fine. And then this practice, of course, of the language, this production of language is what? That you see, he makes mistakes, and he tries to put the things that he practiced in the presence of the teacher. In practice, the environment was controlled. And you might remember that we talked earlier that in practice, the games are provided by the teacher. Fine. Whereas in the production stage, what happens? Yes, students are expected to design their own games. Right, students? So this is what, or maybe in the practice stage, a role play is given by the teacher. So in the production stage, students can, in fact, can design their own role plays. Similarly, for discourse change or for the communication gap activities. So this is what happens in this production stage. So my dear students, yes, when you teach language, so you need to, of course, allocate due time to the production stage, because this stage gives more confidence to the learners. Because in this stage, he feels that he has really assimilated whatever was practiced in the previous stage and whatever was given in the presentation stage. So this stage has a value. It's very important one, right? If you talk about the first stage, yes, the role of the teacher, there is a shift with that control with the teacher. The teacher presents in the best possible way, and here in the production stage, the ball is with the student course, and they try to reflect that they have assimilated that language item well, and through their production stage, through their role plays, through their games, through their communication gap activities, they show that they have done it well. So this is what production stage is all about. The aim of the production stage is to give an opportunity to the learner, so that he can produce that language which has been presented and practiced in the class. So that's why this stage has a value. Now moving on to today's lecture, my dear students. Today what we have our plan is that I told you earlier that we have to have a glance on all these three stages, right? So these three stages are important, right? And we'll try to compare these three stages, mean presentation, practice and production stage. So which things we will see, right? On the slide you can see that the purpose is important. I mean, now the purpose of all these three stages. Similarly, important features of all these three stages, mean 3 P's, right? For example, important features of presentation, practice and production. And the third thing is typical activities. Fine? Activities of these three stages, role of teacher in these three stages, type of interaction for all these three stages, then degree of control, correction, and the length and place in lesson. So these are the points, my dear students, we will be talking about, and we will seeing in these three stages of lesson, that is presentation, practice, and of course production stage. Let's see that how these points, of course, what are the differences, what are the similarities as far as the purpose is concerned, features are concerned, activities are concerned, of course the role of a teacher, so on and so forth. So we have to have a bird eye view, we have to have a glance of all these three stages of this oral lesson. First of all, the purpose. What is purpose of presentation? You all know, yes, to present, right? So of course purpose is a must. Fine. If you are not clear about the purpose, so you are confused, the teacher is confused, and if you are confused, naturally you will make your students confused. So please make things clear, right? If you have any confusion, remove it before the class, right? There is no harm in removing confusion, there is no harm in learning, right? But if you take that confusion in the class, so the point is that you will make 30 students confused. So this is very, very important, my dear students, that you see when you go to a class, so don't take that confusion with you. You can go to the class without that confusion. This is important. So what is the purpose of presentation? To give students an opportunity to realize the usefulness and relevance of new language item. This is important. That of course when you present, student must realize that it is important for them, fine, and it is relevant to their day-to-day conversation, and this is relevant to their course that they are having, in fact. Fine. If there is no relevance of that language item, and generally it happens sometimes, the student feels that whatever is being taught is not relevant to them. Fine. So if sometimes students cannot know it, so it is the teacher's responsibility to make them realize that yes, this is the part, that this is the language item, or of course the structure that we are talking about, how it can be used in your discourse, in your conversation. They may not know it. Being student at times, they may not know it, but the teacher knows, in fact. So teachers should in fact help students out. So this is the purpose of this presentation stage is that this is relevant and it is useful, and again to present the meaning and form, of course, right? What is the form? Form means again morphology, right? That form, if it is in the forms of the verb, all right, the base form, the past form, the past participle form, or the present participle form, right? And again semantic of that. Of course, how can you do it? I mean, some teachers even in the presentation stage, they elicit from the students, fine, or they bring it with them, fine. So this is what the purpose is, to present the meaning and the form, and to check the understanding, how much students already know. When you present something, so three things you must keep in mind. What is the purpose of that? Its relevance, its form, its meaning, right? Semantic, and check the understanding of the students. This is of course the purpose of presentation. Now what is the purpose of what? Practice stage. You see, mind you, first of all I told you that we are seeing, of course, the purpose of all three stages. So we saw the purpose of presentation. Now we are moving on to see the purpose of practice stage. So to provide what? Maximum practice within controlled but realistic and contextualized framework. Three key concepts are there you need to understand. Within what? Control means the teacher is there, of course, right? So environment is controlled, teacher is there to help them out, fine. And then realistic, of course, it should not be away from their mind that whatever is, it's very much possible, right? So, and third thing is in a contact, create that situation, fine. That of course if it is a role play between a hotel manager and a customer, so create that situation. That is mean, for in that context they can do it. Or if it is a meeting a dialogue between an operation manager and a customer, so again they contextualize it in that situation. Or it's a dialogue between a teacher and a student, so contextualize it. And then realistic mean that whatever sentences you expect from a teacher or whatever replies you expect from a student, you can give that. So that makes it what? Realistic, and in a particular situation, contextualize, and above all, that is what we call it controlled. That this is purpose of practice. And also to build confidence in using new language, very important. Motivation is very important. Giving confidence to students is very important, of course. And that confidence really serves a lot. Confidence prepares students for that, right? So the practice stage, in fact, when the teacher gives confidence to the students, making them realize that they all can do that. It is for them. It is not a difficult job. So that gives them confidence. If the teachers give this impression that, I mean, you cannot do it, or you are dull, or you are so and so, that would be tough for the students. So giving confidence to students, giving them confidence is a must for this activity. So for the practice stage, you see that the purpose is to give them confidence, purpose is to provide them maximum practice with controlled environment. Now the purpose of production stage. See, we talk about purpose of practice a while from now. What is the purpose of production stage? Provide an opportunity, fine, for students to use new language in freer, more creative ways. Yes, again I told you earlier that in production stage, games can be created by the students. So that's why when you talk of the production stage, so environment should be free, freer environment, right? So if the teacher intends to correct, he should wait for the time to correct. Clear? So if he keeps on correcting, of course, with every sentence, that would shatter the confidence of the students. So that you need to be very careful once you are correcting the students in the production stage. So it should be freer, right? More creative ways. Students, in fact, I mean, the dialogue has been given in the practice stage, and now it's a time for the learner to create their own dialogues. So this is what happens in the production stage. The purpose is, and of course, to check how much, in fact, has really been learned. This is important because, I mean, this stage tells the real learning of the learners. Well, students, so this stage, in fact, the production stage checks what? The real learning of the students, how much they have learned, because they can produce only if they have learned something, right? If they have practiced something well. If they are unable to practice something, which means that yes, they won't be able to produce something. Like I told you earlier that, well, I mean, the presentation, the production, and presentation, the practice and production stage, yes, they are interlinked. Performance of the production stage depends on the practice stage, and practice stage depends on the presentation stage, and of course presentation stage depends on the warm-up stage, right? So therefore these are interwoven, interlinked. Performance of production stage is linked, depends on what? The previous stage. If the previous stage was fine, you could expect that production stage would be better. So that's why you need to keep this in mind. Then also what? To integrate new language with old. It's very important. You can integrate whatever you have already learned, right? And then you integrate with the new one. For example, the last lesson was on first condition, and today's lesson is on second condition. So again, I mean, the student, of course, once they produce something, they can link it. That when to use, for example, the first condition, and when to use the second condition, and maybe in the third lesson they'd be able to see when to use the third condition. So of course they integrate. And then another, of course, purpose of production stage is to practice dealing with the unpredictable. Yes, of course, because in production stage, yes, we expect that students would be more creative. Fine, they would be able to deal with something which is unpredictable. Fine. For example, I'm not well. So what happens? Here, maybe in the practice stage, of course, the teacher gives them that, yes, you see the doctor. But I mean, in the production stage, if I say I'm not well, students say, yeah, you should take rest. Or I'm not well, students might say, well, you need to take water. So again, something that is unpredictable. Of course, another is that to motivate students, right? That of course in production stage, you motivate, because motivation is a key role, plays a key role of course in the production. And to help students revise or diagnose, because this is, I mean, as a stage where you help the learners, students, that to realize and also to diagnose what the problems, if they are unable to produce something, unable to speak, which means that there was something was lacking in the previous stages, so they go back and improve their practice stage. Or if the practice stage was fine, maybe there was something wrong in the presentation stage. So in this way they go back and they hold themselves accountable, themselves of course, and then accountability, and sometimes they see the teachers, and of course sometimes the teachers have to redo their presentation stage. So this is what these are the purposes of presentation, practice and production stage. The next feature is of course, that is features of production. Again, features of 3 P's. What are the features of production, practice and presentation, practice and production stage? So the first feature of course of the presentation stage is clear, motivating, natural and relevant context. So when you teach, of course, my dear students, when you present something, this is one of the features of this presentation stage, is that it is in the relevant context. And of course, model sentences can be given, right? The model sentences, example, you talk of the sentence in present simple tense, so give them model sentences. You are talking about, if conditions, you can give them model sentences. Or you are talking about, use of modal verbs. So model sentences can be given. You must work hard, you mustn't do it, you need to be on time, I need to talk to somebody. So the model sentences. And of course concept checking. Definitely when you present, of course, this can be a feature of presentation stage, that yes, they check the concept of the student, that of course whether they have absorbed the concept, whether they have assimilated it, right? For example, if the student knows knows present simple tense, but if he is unable to use, if he doesn't know when to use it, right? So if he does not know when to use that present simple tense, which means that you see he is unable to. Fine. He knows that the form of that sentence, he knows the structure of that sentence, but he is unable to use it. Right? So similarly, of course, if he knows that, how to convert a present simple tense into past tense, but he doesn't know when to use past tense. And this is again the problem with this grammar translation method, that where students, where students learn things, but when it comes to application of that, they are unable to. So therefore, definitely, of course, this is the feature of presentation stage, that we check the concepts. And again, grammatical explanation if necessary. Whenever, of course, you see that you are teaching them the grammar, particularly pedagogical grammar, where you give them rules. Whatever approach you follow, it is deductive or inductive. Sometimes you elicit rules from the students. It's up to you. You can use that, or you give them rules, like the old approaches that they give students rules, and of course, and then you ask them to practice. But the modern approach is that, of course, elicit rules from the students, right? And you can make them practice. So these were, of course, features of the presentation stage. Now some features of practice stage, my dear students. What are these? Yes, framework provides guidelines for utterances, reduces scope for errors. Right? So here is a framework for utterance, that people would utter, in fact. So this is a feature of which stage, like we saw in practice stage, student practice. So in this, important feature is that there is a reference, there is a framework, there is an opportunity for the utterances of the students. Fine, and of course, once the students utter, what happens? Yes, scope of the error. And it is controlled one, of course. So if there is a mistake, there is an error, So that can be judged, of course. And clear and realistic, of course, what we call it in this practice stage, the feature is that realistic prompts, quick answers and clear answers, in fact. Fine. And then students' talking time maximized. We know, of course, that in the presentation stage we saw that his teacher talks more, he discusses things more as compared to the students. Whereas in this case we see the teacher's time reduces and the student times increases. So maximum participation of the students is required. That is another feature of this practice stage. Well, students, so this is again, I mean, some features of what we call it production stage, that clear instructions are there. You see, and then students work, in fact, at their own pace in this stage. This is also a feature of production stage. Mind you, we're talking about important features of which stage? Production stage. Do you understand? Are you with me? Okay, what are we talking about today? We are reviewing, or we are having a glance on all the three stages of, yes, oral lesson. Which three lessons? Which three stages? Yes, presentation, good, then practice, then production, very good. And a stage before that, oh good, we call it warm-up stage, right, where you motivate the learners for the lesson that you have to present, and once you present it, you make them practice, and once students practice, it's time for production. And today we are reviewing, and while reviewing, which features we are keeping in mind? Purpose of all three stages, and then features of all three stages. So the feature of production stage is that students work on their own pace, and there is, of course, possibility of making material. Now the third thing is typical activities. Fine, in 3Ps, of course, we call them 3Ps as well. So what are the typical activities in all three stages of an oral lesson? So the first means presentation. What is it? Build up of appropriate situational and linguistic context for new language. We talked about this linguistic context and we talk about situational context, right? So situation and the language. This is important. Fine. What is the situation and which language item we need for that? I mean, yes, you need to direct somebody. So imperatives. You need to request somebody, of course, again, that we can use imperatives. You have to say no. Again, situation is denying something, rejecting something. So again, you can use negatives. If you need to inquire something, you can ask questions, in fact. So that is what I mean. What is the situation and which linguistic item we need to use that. So this is my dear students, I mean activities of the presentation stage. Again, listening to, and of course an initial repetition of model sentences again is important. Well, so this is what we are talking about, that you see, as far as activities are concerned of the presentation stage. What is it? Repetition of the model sentences. This is an activity that we do. And of course what we do, that we build up of appropriate situational and linguistic context for the new language. Alright, now what are the activities for the practice stage? Drills are there, very simple. There can be choral drills and there can be individual. What is a choral drill, my dear students? When everybody in chorus, right? So what happens in choral songs? So when student, of course there are 50 students and there are 40 students, whatever, they reply in chorus or individual. I mean, I make Ali practice, I ask Ali to practice that. If there is a problem, so that would be an individual, what we call it, drills. It can be, of course, lines, could be 2, 3, 4 lines dialogue, information and opinion gap. These are the typical activities in practice stage. Now, what are the typical activities in production stage? Very simple. They could be role plays, they could be games, they could be discourse chains, discussions, information, communication gaps and all that. So these were, my dear students, the activities. In fact, we call them typical activities in the 3Ps or 3 stages of an oral lesson. In production stage, what? See, you see, you listen to an initial, of course, repetition of model sentences, appropriate context, linguistic or situational, and then in practice drills are there, then be dialogues, or in the production stage you have role plays, you have games, so on and so forth. Alright, now what is the role of a teacher in 3 Ps, right? So very important, role of a teacher is very important, and we had as a lecture on it, the very first lecture, we talked about that what is the role of a teacher. Now we see the role of a teacher in these 3 Ps, right? That of course, which role the teacher must play in presentation and practice and of course production. So the role of a teacher in presentation, informant. See, again you go back, we talk about informant, that teacher in fact he has information. Fine. So he informs, and how he informs, yes, it depends on the teacher's creativity. Maybe that he brings information and he transfers through whiteboard, through blackboard, through multimedia, whatever. Or he gets information, and he adds to it and he informs students. So teacher, of course, is informant. In presentation, very simple. In practice, he is conductor. Is that clear? So he conducts the class. That's a controlled environment is there. So practice can be done, of course, in the presence of a teacher. So he conducts the activities which are in the class. Also he is corrector, right? So he corrects if there is a problem in the practice stage. Fine, if there is a problem in the dialogue, in the sentence where the students, repeatedly make some mistakes. So you see, maybe it's an error. So that students and teacher is there to correct it. Students, remember the difference between a mistake and an error. Mistake may be slip of tongue, slip of pen. Error is that maybe faulty learning, that student doesn't know it. Right? If I say that there is common mistake, the student, he works. So if the student, the slip of tongue, of course he says he work. And if he corrects himself, he works, it means it was just a mistake. But if he says he work, and he work, and you, through body language, you make him realize that something is wrong, and still he says he work, which means it's an error, it's a faulty teaching or faulty learning. So that is the difference between an error and a mistake. So the role of a teacher in practice, conductor and corrector. Then role of a teacher in production, what is it? Monitor, advisor, encourager, mistake hearer and consultant. Very good. So this is what means the teacher role in these 3 Ps, right? Simple. Presentation is informant, right? And in practice he is what? He is conductor. He is corrector. He is correct mean, and then in the last stage, production stage, his role is what? He advises. Fine. And also he encourages students, motivates students, and he of course hears to mistakes and he gives consultancy whenever he finds it suitable. Well, students, so now we talk about purpose of 3 Ps, we talk about features of 3 Ps, and now we talked about role of a teacher in 3 Ps. Now the fourth point is that we're going to talk about is types of interaction in 3 Ps in an oral lesson. Right? What kind of interaction would be there? If you remember, we talked about that in grammar translation method, of course, the interaction was between only the teacher, right? Teacher and a specific student. There was no interaction among students. So here we'll see that once you have an oral lesson, so which kind of, in fact, interaction would be there? So in the presentation stage, teacher to student, of course, it can be choral, or it can be individual, right? So interaction can be in chorus or it can be individual. For example, student, teacher ask, practice this sentence. So everybody in chorus practices speaking that sentence, if it is of course the speaking class, or maybe of course if the writing class, maybe he asks everybody to write that sentence. Clear? So in chorus mean student, the interaction can be, or it can be between student and a teacher individually. So this is what presentation stage, interaction in chorus or in teacher to student individually. In practice stage, again it can be in pair work, it can be teacher to student. The type of interaction can be between teacher and a student, fine, or between teacher to student, open pairs, or between student to student, closed pairs. Open pairs mean other can, of course, and open-ended questions, right? Can be discussed, but in close mean on a particular given situation, right? Close-ended questions we call them. So therefore, this is what type of interaction in practice is. Can be closed, it can be open. Student and teacher, open, right? And students for closed pairs, or it can be between teacher and student, that is interaction. The third thing is the type of interaction in production, of course, student-student pair, groups, mingles. Is that clear? So dear students, this is what we talk about, the type of interaction in 3Ps. As far as interaction is concerned, fine. In the production, of course, it is in chorus, it can be individual. In practice, it can be open pair, it can be closed pair, it can be teacher and student. In the production stage, pair work between students or in groups. So this is what we call it, that you see type of interactions in 3Ps. Now the next is that degree of control in 3Ps. Right? What is the degree of control? What does it mean, by the way? The control. How much control is there in the class? So, and you remember that we talked about in the presentation stage, the teacher, of course, that you see, he presents, right? And in the production stage, we saw that shifts change. Now the student has to practice more. So let's see, of course, this degree of control in 3 stages. So in the first stage, that is presentation stage, highly controlled, T-model, teacher-centered class. And you say why? Because it's a teacher's time. He has to, in fact, communicate. He has to make people aware. He has to write some sentences on the board, right? So the control is what it is. Shift is paradigm is with the teacher, that he controls. So that is T-model, mean teacher-centered class. So that's the stages. This the presentation stage. Very simple. It is highly controlled, T-model. And next, of course, degree of control in practice stage. I mean, of course, because very controlled, students have limited choice, in fact. Because whatever has been presented, now it's time to practice. Fine? So here means students have limited choice, means that they cannot create a new sentence on their own. They have to practice whatever has been taught, whatever has been presented in the previous stage, right? So this can be, in fact, mean you can say a limitation of this stage, that you see they have to practice whatever has been discussed, and the teacher, in fact, teacher ensures it, right? So that is what here is in the practice stage. However, in the last stage, the production stage, he has free hand to students. So I told you that in the first, as far as the degree of control is concerned, all right, in the first stage we saw that it is with the teacher, it's T model. So maybe in the production stage we can call it the S model, the student centered, where the students are given free hand and they can, in fact, interact, and they can discuss, and they can create new things, they can create activities, they can have role plays, because now it is the time for the production stage. So you see, in the practice stage, because it depends on the previous stage. So that's why the degree of control is highly, of course, controlled in the presentation stage, and of course in the last stage students are given free hand. So this was the point that we talked about. You see how to see the degree of control in all 3 stages. The next one is correction. It's a very important point that you see, of course, teachers are there to correct, but see that correction in the presentation and the practice and the production stage. So correction in presentation, my dear students, important to correct so that students have correct grasp of form. Because it is a stage where teacher is presenting and of course he can correct them, right? So while eliciting information from the students, or while telling them, whenever the students ask a question, in fact, or they want to make things clear, so teachers can do that. Whereas in practice stage, yes, teachers, other students, okay, fine. At times teacher can correct. At times, in fact, self-correction would be there, or other students can correct. Since it's a practice stage, right? So a teacher has right to correct, he can correct, all self-correction can be there, or you can see other students can correct. So my dear students, in this practice stage, of course, correction is there, right? And the last, of course, we call it production stage, generally non-interference by the teacher. Here correction is there, that this is just believed that it's a production stage, and a teacher tries to be at the, of course, right aside, and he lets students experiment, he lets students in fact produce, and he tries to in fact create environment for the students so that they can practice things independently, right? So this is a stage, of course, where the students are not intervened more. Fine. So as far as this correction is concerned, right, in the first stage, of course, correction is there, it's more important. In the practice stage also, you see, it can be done, other student can do, teacher can do. However, in the production stage, generally it is believed. And even, of course, in the practice stage, how it is done, you remember that, of course, I mean, we see the situation, when to correct and when not to correct, it is important. Yes, students. So we're talking about, yes, three in fact stages: presentation, production, and what? The practice. So we are in fact having a class of all these three stages of an oral lesson. So now we are going to talk about length and place in presentation. Definitely, my dear students, the presentation is the first stage. So its duration may be short, right? If this teacher wants to give more time to the practice and to the production, so the duration of this presentation stage can be shorter, right? And where to place it? People, of course, generally we see that, well, it's a presentation stage and we can place it at the beginning. However, sometimes, I mean, some teachers are of the view that yes, we do not present things in the beginning, we make students practice, fine, and then of course production, and maybe at the end you do that. But generally it is accepted that you present, but again, the how you present is important. Your presentation modes can be different, right? It should not be that the old traditional way of presentation where you simply teach, you simply give them rules, fine, and those rules again may confuse the learners. So these rules, in fact, when you simply teach them in a traditional way, so that may not help you. But if you are innovative, fine, in your presentation, so of course your practice would definitely be useful. So that's what you see, that it should be short and it should be at the beginning. Now coming to the length and place in practice. So it depends on your learners. It depends on the difficulty level of that language item that you are teaching, or it also depends on the environment. It depends on the learners as well. You see, if the learners find it easy, you can give them less time. If the learners need more time and they need to practice more, so definitely you need to give them more time, right? So that is what, as far as practice is concerned, it depends, and then follows presentation or at the beginning for revision. Generally, in fact, this as far as its place is concerned, it comes after the first stage, that is presentation stage, and its duration, it can be longer, right? I mean, if you have a 30 minutes class, you can see that maybe if you spend 5 minutes for the presentation stage, and then you see how much time you should give in the production or how much time you should give for the practice stage. So this is important. And then coming to the production stage, my dear students, it depends again on level of students and type of activity. Fine. If the level of student is advanced, all right, so of course this production stage can be short. But if the level of students, of course, if they are beginners and they need more time, so you can in fact give more time to the production stage, and of course it is after presentation and practice stage. So generally these are the stages of a good lesson plan. That you see, first there is a time that you present, fine, and while presenting you need to decide that how much time should we allocate for this stage, considering that your environment, considering your students, considering the language item to be taught, to be discussed, to be presented, and then accordingly you move on to the next stage, the practice stage. And here again you need to be sensible, you need to be rational, you need to keep students in mind, you keep in mind the of course the policies, and then of course the practice stage time it should be decided. And also moving on to what, the presentation stage, where you have to see, right, you have to care for in fact that who are your learners, right, what is their level of understanding, their assumed knowledge, fine. And again the need of the learner is also important. Some learner definitely, and some are willing to, of course, have more time in the production stage. Yes, some learners are active learners in fact. So for active learners, maybe your presentation stage would be shorter, and maybe your practice stage would be shorter, and of course your production stage would be more. Your production stage would be more. If you feel that the learners are advanced learners and whatever you discuss they can easily grab it and they have practiced it well, so now you can give them time for production. But on the other hand, if you feel that learners are struggling in the presentation stage or they are struggling in the practice stage, so this duration of the production stage in this case can be short. Then you can give more time to the practice phase, because in the practice phase definitely they would put efforts and they would be learning more. Intention definitely is, of course, objective is to make your learner in fact communicate in that language, to make your learner fluent in that language, to make your learner good at that language. And of course, and it depends that how you achieve it. If you could achieve it by giving more time to the practice, it works. If you achieve it by giving more time to the production, it works. So it depends on the situation, right? Situation determines that when to place it, where to place it, and how much time we should give to each of these stages of an oral lesson. I hope you understand, right? So these were in fact, my dear students, we talked about in this lecture number 6, that we had a review, of course, of all the 3 stages of an oral lesson, and things we saw in all these stages are what we saw: the purpose of the presentation stage, and we saw that what is the purpose of presentation stage? Yes, to present, right? To give an opportunity to the students, in fact, that also to see their concept. And then we see the purpose of the practice stage. Of course, very simple. The purpose of practice stage is to make students practice in a controlled environment. And of course, we saw the purpose of the production stage, very easy. That of course, where students can in fact produce, can speak that language, and then of course and independently. That was the purpose. Then we saw the features of the presentation stage. Of course, it's a feature that teachers present, fine, and you see it's important, of course, whatever is to be taught. Then we saw the feature of the practice stage, where the students in fact practice among themselves. Teacher in fact helps them out. And then we see the in fact the feature of the production stage. Of course, students independently create new language items, create dialogue, and they work on that. Typical activities in the presentation stage, of course, teacher can elicit things from the students. Teacher can give them forms. Teacher can in fact write model sentences, of course. And then typical activities in the practice stage, what happens is there may be in fact some activities, of course. Students can interact with one another. Teacher can interact with the students, and then in the production stage, there can be role plays, there can be games, there can be this and that. So the role of a teacher in the presentation stage, we saw informant, right? In the practice stage, we saw he's conductor. He conducts the class. Also, he's a corrector. And in the production stage, of course, the teacher stands aloof at times, that he lets students perform, right? So that's why the role of a teacher is very important in as far as what we call it. Yes, in this the three stages of the lesson, of an oral lesson are concerned, that he becomes informant, because he is a team model class, right? Teacher-centered class, right? And then we move on to, of course, that is the practice stage. See, we saw the teacher is a conductor, he's a corrector. And in the last stage, we saw that teacher stands aloof. He stands of kind that he lets people perform. Then type of interaction we saw, of course, in the presentation stage. Yes, there can be interaction, but they comparatively less interaction. It can be between the teacher and the student. Whereas in practice stage, yes, interaction can be pair work, it can be close pairs, it can be between teacher and a student, it can be between, students in fact. In the production stage, we saw that interaction, of course, is there more among the students, right? So that is, of course, the kind of interaction that we have in all these stages. Degree of control, yes, of course, in the presentation, controlled by teacher. Teacher is authority. In fact, is a T-centered class, teacher-centered class. In practice stage, of course, degree of control is shifts now. Teacher is there, teacher control is there, but the student practice. And in the production stage now, of course, now the students are independent, they can practice, they can produce on their own. Correction, of course, in the presentation stage, yes, of course, teacher corrects the students so that they have the grasp of that language item. Fine. Students ask questions and teacher corrects them. In the practice stage, of course, there is correction. Of course, there is correction because it's a controlled environment. And in the last stage, of course, correction is maybe on their own, students correct themselves, right? And the last one is, we call it the length and place in lesson. So my dear students, what we see in this, of course, that where to place this presentation stage. Generally, it is accepted that this presentation should be at the beginning, and its duration can be short. But again, it is not hard and fast. If you feel that the learners, particularly, of course, if you are teaching to the students, in fact, if the environment is, of course, where code switching is not possible, where people are from multilinguals, so it's difficult. If all are, monolingual class, if this class is monolingual, maybe you find it easy, right? If the first language of the teacher and the learner is same, so things can be done easily. However, if the teacher's first language is different and the learner's first language is different, so things can be tough for both the presenter, for the teacher, and for the audience, for the presentees, for the students. So here you can give more time to the presentation stage and again to the practice stage. It's very important, right, students? So practice stage, you see, again it depends. If the student need more time, yes, we can allocate more time for practice stage. We can give more time to the practice stage so that they would practice as much as they can. And then moving on to the production stage, of course, if the learners are active, they are sharp, they have grasped everything, and they want more time to produce, so give them this chance, give them free hand. Fine. And if they are slow learners, and if you feel that they need more time in the practice, so we can cut short the time from the production stage. So dear students, in all, of course, today in this lecture, what we did, that we had a review, we had a glance of all these three stages of the lesson plan. And once you teach language, my dear students, of course, you will see that how these stages can help you in your language teaching. Lesson plans particularly, of course, that if you have to present, so how do you present? First of all, you have to ask this question, that how do you present things, right? And do you simply write on the board, or do you simply give them handouts, right? It happens in some classes that the teacher, of course, prepares handout and he gives that handout to the students, and then he moves on to the practice stage, in fact. So you see, it is quite possible, and of course on that handout explanation is given. Maybe if for writing class that can work well, then of course you see you do your homework, you come up with a handout, and what students do, right, they simply get that handout, fine, and what else they do, they of course get to practice things. Fine. So this is one of the possibilities, right? That you see, you give them handout, and of course you make them practice, right? So this is also, you see, can be done. Fine, as far as what your presentation is concerned. And then you see that the way you present and the way we talked about. Do you find any differences between, of course, the presentation or the way, the approach that you use? And if you feel that this approach works more, if you feel this approach of presentation, of course, in the beginning, you see, it's better for the students that they come to know what to practice and what to produce. Or in other words, of course, that you see, at times it happens that a language teacher is unable to distinguish between these three stages. So what he does, that he keeps on presenting things, right? So the teacher, in fact, does not give them time for the practice, and if they don't have time for practice, so definitely they will not be able to produce. So dear students, this is important that we talked about these three stages of an oral lesson, and you have to see that how these stages can improve your language teaching if you are a language teacher. So all these things, the presentation, the practice, and we call it production stage. All stages are important for our language teaching. So inshallah, we'll be moving on to the next lecture. We'll be talking about lesson plan. Till then, it's a time to say goodbye.